Welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of my favorite art photo books. Now previously we've looked at some really good darkroom construction books. We looked at some great chemical and formula books. Today we're just going to look at some of the art books that I have and have collected over the years. My primary concern with photography is art. That's what I have a master's degree in, so it's what I typically think about when it comes to my own photography. So I have a big collection of books. Now it's not all the books I have today. We're only going to be able to look at a handful, not all of these. Well, probably do a part 2 and even maybe a 3 in the future. But these are some of my favorites. We're going to look at what they are, maybe flip through a few and talk about some of the photos. They may inform my own work, and they might just be stuff that I just enjoy looking at. So let's go ahead and grab a couple and dive inside, see what they look like. One of my all-time favorites is Richard Avedon's In the American West. This is just portraits. It's not in the American West specifically, but it does have a few from it. It's an interesting book because you can actually open it from either direction, and it talks about some of his best photos, some of his history and whatnot. It's a pretty good book to inform you as to who he was, how he liked to think about his work. When it comes to the actual portraits, we do have quite a few of the American West. Love him or hate him, it's undeniable that Richard Avedon had a huge impact on portrait photography in the art world. There are a lot of imitators. He didn't originate this sort of look. He may have perfected it with the white background, but he owes quite a bit to August Sander. And I mean, the work is really fantastic. It's clear that he was really great at portraits. Some people like to accuse him of exploitation. I think those arguments are a valid concern, but they are still fantastic photographs. He did not take anyone's portrait without their permission, so they were active participants, and that's important to remember when it comes to portraits and photography. It's very different to sneak a photograph of someone as opposed to this, where it's very direct and participatory. So one of my favorites, this is a good book that just goes through a few different things about it and about him, and not necessarily just the American West, which is still one of my favorites, and I have yet to find a good copy that I can afford, but as soon as I do, I'm definitely going to get one. They reprint it all the time, so I'll probably have to get one of the reprints next time it comes around. So good book, great photographer. I highly recommend you pick up a copy of some of his work. Here is one of my favorites of all time. This is John Fall's Altered Landscapes. I had a great pleasure of hearing him speak when he did a lecture at the University of Kentucky when I was teaching there, and his work's very interesting. If you're not familiar with Altered Landscapes, he would, as we'll look through here, manipulate perspective when it comes to landscape. So let's take a look at a few of these. And the idea here is that he wanted to subvert the idea of a photograph of the landscape, a three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional medium. So if you've never seen this, you may notice this rectangle here on the photograph, and it's not drawn. It's literally pieces of string that he has placed on the landscape itself, but has meticulously placed it to create a perfect rectangle through the perspective of the camera. It's quite distorted if you saw it in person. So it's quite a bit of manipulation. Here with the columns, we have a right angle, and these are pieces of blue tape and on this one it's pieces of red tape at a right angle, or a right angle, and it simply gives the appearance. So you can kind of tell up here that it's stretched across the flute of the column. You can see a shadow, but it's just placement and perception. And I think it's just absolutely brilliant. He really does play with your notions of how things are photographed, how things look photographed, and the reminder to the viewer that while this may be a three-dimensional place, it is ultimately just a two-dimensional image. And it's really spectacular work. If you can pick up a copy, which of course is going to be on the used market because these are, what, 1976? Strongly recommended. He told a great story about this one, about he set up these green crosses of wire. Let me see if I can get the glare off of there. These green crosses of wire so that they appeared exactly the same size, foreground and background, and then these two dogs just came up and sat down while he's trying to take a photograph. So rather than turn them away, he just included them. This one's particularly interesting. The grid lines are perfectly parallel on the image. Of course, in the real world, they would be converging to a point, so they are diverging as they move away from the camera, just to give the illusion. And of course, the spacing of the horizontal, as it got further back, they would appear closer if they were evenly spaced, so they're getting further apart to appear evenly spaced. It's just excellent use of the medium. And it was a great lecture. So he passed away a few years ago. Unfortunately, you would not be able to hear him talk about this work anymore. But it's just, it's a great book. And if you have a chance to see his work up in a gallery as any sort of retrospective, I would highly recommend it. It's very interesting stuff. Another landscape book that I would recommend you check out, one of my favorites here, Third View, Second Sight. It's what was called the New Topographics, or part of the movement of New Topographics. And a lot of this was pioneered by Mark Klett and Byron Wolfe. They are still active. They are still doing work and still talking about it at conferences and lectures and whatnot. And it's interesting work as well. So the concept here, and you can see it with these three, is they took old photographs that were typically survey photographs, and then in the 1970s they would, through a lot of math, figure out what lens focal length was used and the exact point of camera placement of the original, and they would recreate it. They would go back to the location, they would use the same focal length, they would use basically the same tripod holes. And then 20 years after that, in the 1990s, they did it a second time, and you can really see the progression of the location as the passage of time came through. So here, for example, move this over, we can see this old photograph. They really found this location again and then rephotographed it here. Vegetation is quite different. This photograph from 1868 of Hanging Rock, they relocated and photographed in the 70s and then again in the 90s. And it's just a really great way of looking at the progression of the landscape and how man has influenced it over time. So we have the same house over those 20-year span, and I strongly recommend checking the work out. Well, there's quite a bit of difference there in the water, isn't it? We've got Shoshone Falls, Timothy O'Sullivan, 1874, and then Mark Klett in 1980. same location, a lot less water. And what do we have? Marclet in 1999. So while not a big difference here, that 100 years definitely made quite a difference from the O'Sullivan photograph. All right, one more I'm going to look at today. We'll look at more in the future. This is Richard Mizrak's, however you want to say it, pictures of paintings. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It is pictures of paintings. What he has done is gone to museums. We have a variety of Renaissance up through, I would say, late 1800, so just prior to the abstract expressionist period, and he's photographed them. And while that sounds like it's rather boring, it gives an idea, and granted this is not everybody's taste, it gives a pretty good idea of how a photographer sees things. We are not looking at the entire painting. Instead, we have portions of the painting, we have portions of frames. So he is reframing art through the eye of the camera. So we can see here with the portrait that we have some of the gilded frame, but we now have the whole frame. So that reframing, relooking, rethinking, part of the glare here is from my light, but part of the glare here is from the gallery lighting. So he's not trying to get a clear, perfect, let me tip this up, get the glare off of there. He's not trying to get a clear, perfect look. He is instead thinking about how art is viewed, how we view and consume art, how we view the portrait and the subject matter through a more modern eye. And so if you're very interested in ideas of deconstruction of classical art in more modern interpretation, then this is a good book for you. And his work goes quite a bit into doing that sort of thing. This, for example, is a fantastic example of how modern photography would be treating the landscape in general. So he's photographing a portion of a much larger painting, but rather than try to trick the eye into saying that this is a true landscape, he's included part of the frame. So he's letting you in on his ideas. And I think that's just a great way of looking at how we view things now versus how things were viewed then, in terms of image composition and so forth. And through it, he's telling his own stories rather than just allowing the original painter to tell its stories. So in this case, we have part of the story of the resurrection of Christ with the Roman soldier, and he's made it more about this individual and not the whole painting. It's interesting stuff. I realize this is not everything that everybody who makes photographs or watches this channel appreciates or enjoys. But if you're looking for something new, looking for something challenging, I would recommend definitely checking that out. Here we have 3 different versions. We've got the top 2/3 of the painting, which he then got even closer for a more pained portrait. And then 3rd frame, breaking that down even more. So even as he photographed, he rethought the framing and composition of each one. So let's take a look. That's about as deep an eye roll as my sister would give in high school. So that's about the same kind of expression I would give her when she rolled her eyes at me. Great looking painting. I suggest checking it out. That's really fantastic here. Just the paintwork going from sharp to blurred photographically. I think the brushwork there is extraordinary, and that's credit to the original painter. So Richard Mizrach. Pictures of paintings. I would definitely at least check it out, just to educate yourself. All right, that's going to be all that we look at today. I've got a lot more books, but just to give you an idea of what kind of books I've got and what I look at. I don't necessarily make the same kind of work. You may not make the same kind of work, but that doesn't mean that you don't like to look at other people's photographs. So I highly recommend you do. So thanks for watching. Hope you saw a few interesting things. Maybe saw some people you didn't know about before and piqued your interest. Get out there, look at some more photographs, and we'll see you next time.